The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late November, slipped beneath the door of Marcus Webb's truck while he slept in the Walmart parking lot. He woke to the sound of Gunnar, his German shepherd, growling softly at the windshield. Marcus rubbed his eyes, breath fogging in the cold cab, and saw the envelope pressed against the glass by the wind. His name was written across it in careful script. Marcus Webb. No address, just his name. Gunnar nudged his arm, ears pricked forward, tail low and uncertain. The dog had that look again, the one he'd worn in Kandahar when something wasn't right, when the air tasted wrong, and danger hid in plain sight. Marcus opened the door slowly. Cold November air rushed in, sharp enough to make him flinch. He grabbed the envelope and climbed back inside, Gunnar pressing close against his leg, warm and solid and real. The envelope was thick, expensive paper, sealed with red wax that had cracked in the cold. He glanced at Gunnar, who sat perfectly still, eyes locked on the envelope, like it might explode. "Easy, boy," Marcus whispered, though his own pulse had quickened. He broke the seal and pulled out the contents. A letter, folded once, a photograph, old and faded, and a key, small and brass, with a lighthouse etched into its head. Marcus unfolded the letter. The handwriting was shaky but deliberate, the kind that came from old hands that still remembered how to hold a pen properly. "Mr. Webb, you don't know me, but I knew your grandfather. Thomas Webb saved my life in 1953 during a storm that should have killed us both. I never forgot that debt. I never could. My name is Edmund Thorne. I own, or owned by the time you read this, a lighthouse on Keeper's Point, 30 miles north of Port Augustine. The property has been sealed since 1968. No one has lived there in 56 years. But I'm leaving it to you because your grandfather taught me that some debts can't be paid, only passed forward. And because you're the only Webb left who might understand what I'm about to tell you. The lighthouse holds more than stone and ice. What's hidden inside was meant to stay buried. But if it surfaces now, better it be found by Thomas Webb's grandson than by the men who've been searching for it since the day I sealed those doors. The property is yours for $1. The key is enclosed. What you do with what you find is your choice. But Marcus, if you open that lighthouse, be ready. Some secrets don't sleep. They wait. Edmund Thorne. Marcus read the letter twice, then a third time. His hands trembled slightly, not from cold but from something deeper, something he couldn't name. Gunnar pressed his nose against Marcus's knee, grounding him the way he always did when the past tried to pull Marcus under. He looked at the photograph. Two men stood on a rocky shore, waves crashing behind them. One was young, broad-shouldered, grinning despite the wind. Marcus recognized his grandfather's face from old family photos, the ones his mother had kept before she stopped speaking to him. The other man was older, lean, with sharp eyes that seemed to see straight through the camera. On the back of the photo, someone had written, "Thomas and Edmund, Keeper's Point, October 1953. Marcus set the photo down carefully and picked up the key. It was cold, heavier than it should be, and when he turned it over, he saw words engraved along the shaft. "Truth outlasts stone." Gunnar growled again, deeper this time, and Marcus felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. The dog stared at the key like it carried a scent that didn't belong in this truck, in this parking lot, in this life they'd been barely surviving. Marcus closed his fist around the key. He didn't believe in fate, or destiny, or gifts from dead men. He believed in what he could see, what he could touch, what Gunnar could smell. And right now, Gunnar was telling him something was wrong, but Marcus had nowhere else to go. His veterans' benefits had run out 6 months ago. The VA had lost his paperwork twice. His ex-wife had taken everything but the truck and the dog. His family had stopped returning his calls years ago when the nightmares got too loud and the anger got too close to the surface. He had $23 in his wallet, a half-tank of gas, and a German shepherd who'd saved his life 4 times in Afghanistan and twice since they'd come home. And now he had a lighthouse. Marcus looked at Gunnar. The dog's brown eyes met his, steady and certain, despite the tension in his body. Gunnar had never steered him wrong. Not once. "What do you think, boy?" Marcus whispered. Gunnar's tail tapped once against the seat. Not excited, not eager, just acknowledging the question. Marcus exhaled slowly. The cold air burned his lungs. Outside, snow had started to fall. Light flakes drifting through the parking lot lights like ash. He folded the letter, tucked it and the photograph into his jacket pocket, and set the key on the dashboard where he could see it. Then he turned the ignition. The truck coughed twice before the engine caught. "All right," Marcus said quietly, more to himself than to Gunnar. "Let's go see what Edmund Thorne left us." Gunnar settled into the passenger seat, head on his paws, but his eyes never closed. The dog watched the road ahead with the same alertness he'd shown in combat, the same focus that had kept them both alive when everything else was falling apart. Marcus pulled out of the parking lot and turned north, following the highway toward Port Augustine. Snow fell harder now, thick enough to blur the edges of the world. The letter sat heavy in his pocket. The key gleamed faintly on the dashboard. And somewhere ahead, 30 miles up the coast, a lighthouse waited in the dark. Marcus drove through the night, Gunnar beside him, both of them moving toward something they couldn't see yet, something that had been waiting for 56 years. The lighthouse had been calling, and Marcus Webb, homeless veteran with $23 and a dog who sensed danger before it arrived, was finally answering. The highway narrowed as Marcus drove north, the asphalt giving way to cracked pavement and then to gravel that crunched beneath his tires. Snow fell steadily now, coating the windshield faster than the wipers could clear it. Gunnar sat up straighter in the passenger seat, nose twitching, ears rotating like radar dishes tracking something Marcus couldn't hear yet. Port Augustine appeared through the snow like a memory half forgotten. Small houses huddled against the cold, smoke rising from chimneys, lights flickering behind frosted windows. The town looked like it had been built 100 years ago and hadn't changed much since. A single gas station sat dark at the edge of town, closed for the night. A church steeple rose above the roofline, its cross barely visible through the falling snow. Marcus didn't stop. The letter had said 30 miles north of Port Augustine, and he'd already driven 28. His hands ached from gripping the steering wheel. His back hurt from sleeping in the truck for the past 4 months. His head throbbed with the kind of exhaustion that came from never really sleeping, just closing your eyes and waiting for the nightmares to start. But Gunnar was alert, focused, and that meant Marcus stayed focused too. The road climbed higher, winding along cliffs that dropped straight into the Atlantic. Marcus caught glimpses of black water through breaks in the snow, waves crashing against rocks far below. The sound reached him even through the closed windows, a deep rhythmic thunder that reminded him of artillery fire in the distance. His hands tightened on the wheel. Gunnar pressed his nose against Marcus's arm, grounding him, pulling him back from Kandahar and into this truck, this road, this moment. "I'm good," Marcus whispered. "I'm here." Gunnar's tail tapped once against the seat. The GPS on Marcus's phone had stopped working 2 miles back, no signal this far from civilization, but he didn't need it. Ahead, rising from the cliffs like a broken finger pointing at the sky, he saw the lighthouse. Keeper's Point Lighthouse. Marcus slowed the truck to a crawl. The building loomed through the snow, tall and narrow, its white paint long since weathered to gray. The light at the top was dark, dead for decades. The structure leaned slightly, as though the wind had been trying to push it into the ocean for 50 years and hadn't quite succeeded. A narrow dirt road led from the highway toward the lighthouse, barely visible beneath the snow. Marcus turned onto it, the truck's tires slipping, before finding purchase. Gunnar stood now, Pause on the dashboard, body rigid. The road ended in a small clearing where the lighthouse stood. Behind it, the cliff dropped away into darkness. The ocean roared below, invisible in the storm. To the left sat a small keeper's cottage, windows boarded up, roof sagging under the weight of snow and time. Marcus parked and killed the engine. Silence rushed in, broken only by the wind and the distant crash of waves. He sat for a moment, hands still on the wheel, trying to remember the last time he'd felt this alone. But he wasn't alone. Gunnar was here. Gunnar was always here. "All right, boy," Marcus said quietly. "Let's take a look." He grabbed his jacket from the back seat, pulled it on, and stepped out into the storm. The cold hit him like a physical blow, wind cutting through his clothes and stealing his breath. Snow stung his face. The ground was slick beneath his boots. Gunnar jumped down beside him, immediately sinking into snow up to his chest. The dog pushed forward anyway, breaking trail toward the lighthouse entrance. Marcus followed, using Gunnar's path, grateful for the dog's instincts even now. The lighthouse door was massive, solid wood reinforced with iron bands. A heavy padlock hung from the latch, rusted but intact. Marcus pulled the brass key from his pocket. His fingers were already numb from the cold. He fitted the key into the lock. It resisted at first, frozen or rusted or both. Marcus pushed harder, feeling the lock grinding against years of neglect. Then something gave. The lock clicked open. Gunnar growled, low and steady. Marcus looked down at the dog. "You smell something?" Gunnar's ears were pinned back, tail stiff, body coiled. The same posture he'd taken in Afghanistan when they were about to enter a building that might be rigged with explosives. Marcus's pulse quickened. He trusted Gunnar more than he trusted his own instincts. If the dog sensed danger, there was danger. But there was nowhere else to go. The truck had a quarter tank of gas left. The nearest town was 30 miles behind them. The storm was getting worse. Marcus pulled the padlock free and pushed the door open. The hinges screamed, a high metallic shriek that cut through the wind. Inside was darkness, absolute and cold. The smell hit him immediately. Salt, mildew, something older than either, something that made his skin crawl. He pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the dark, revealing a circular room with stone walls and a spiral staircase rising up into shadows. The floor was covered in dust thick enough to show footprints, though there were none. No one had been inside this lighthouse in decades. Furniture sat shrouded under tarps, gone gray with age. A table, chairs, what might have been a desk. Against one wall stood a massive iron stove, cold and silent. Everything looked frozen in time, preserved in the darkness like a photograph. Gunnar stepped inside cautiously, nose working overtime. He moved along the wall, sniffing, searching, his body language tense but purposeful. He stopped at the base of the staircase and barked once, sharp and urgent. Marcus joined him, shining his light up the stairs. The spiral climbed into darkness, each step narrow and steep, rising toward the lamp room at the top of the lighthouse. But Gunnar wasn't looking up. He was looking down. The dog pawed at the floor near the base of the stairs, scratching at the stone with his claws. His growl deepened, became something almost frantic. "What is it?" Marcus knelt beside him, running his hand over the floor where Gunnar was digging. The stone felt different here, smoother, as though it had been cut and placed rather than poured as part of the original foundation. Marcus brushed away decades of dust, revealing a seam in the floor. A rectangular outline, barely visible, running along the base of the staircase. His heart hammered. Gunnar barked again, louder, more insistent. Marcus stood and looked around the room, searching for something, anything, that might help. His light caught on the iron stove. He moved toward it, examining the structure. The stove was bolted to the floor, but the bolts looked newer than the stove itself, as though someone had secured it long after installation. He gripped the edge of the stove and pulled. It didn't budge. He pulled harder, muscles straining, and felt something give. Gunnar barked encouragingly. Marcus braced his feet and pulled with everything he had. The stove scraped forward 6 inches, then a foot, revealing a metal ring set into the floor beneath it. A trapdoor. Marcus stared at it, breathing hard. His hands shook, though he couldn't tell if it was from exertion or something else. Gunnar pressed against his leg, solid and warm and real. Edmund said the lighthouse holds more than stone and ice, Marcus whispered. Guess he wasn't kidding. Guess he wasn't kidding. He reached down and gripped the metal ring. It was cold enough to burn his palm. He pulled, and the trapdoor lifted with a deep groan, hinges protesting after decades of disuse. Beneath it was darkness. A ladder descended into the earth, rungs slick with ice and moisture. Cold air rushed up from below, carrying a smell Marcus couldn't identify. Something chemical and sharp and wrong. Gunnar growled again, but this time he didn't back away. Instead, he moved closer to the opening, peering down into the darkness, ears forward, body tense but focused. Marcus shined his light down the shaft. The ladder went deep, at least 20 feet, ending in what looked like a narrow tunnel carved through solid rock. You think we should go down there? Marcus asked. Gunnar looked up at him, brown eyes steady and certain. Then, the dog placed one paw on the top rung of the ladder. Marcus exhaled slowly. All right, but if this goes sideways, I'm blaming you. Gunnar's tail tapped once, and Marcus could have sworn the dog almost smiled. He secured his phone in his pocket, made sure the flashlight app was still running, and climbed onto the ladder. The metal was freezing, slick beneath his hands. Each step down felt like descending into the earth itself, leaving the world above behind. Gunnar followed, claws scraping against the metal rungs, moving with surprising grace despite the treacherous surface. The temperature dropped as they descended. Marcus's breath came out in thick clouds. Ice coated the walls of the shaft, glittering in the flashlight beam like frozen stars. His boots hit solid ground. He stepped off the ladder into the tunnel, and Gunnar dropped down beside him, immediately moving ahead, nose working, tail low, but not tucked. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough for Marcus to walk upright. The walls were rough stone, carved by hand or explosives, impossible to tell. The floor was smooth, worn by decades of seawater, seeping through cracks in the rock. They moved forward slowly, Marcus following Gunnar's lead. The tunnel curved gently to the left, then descended again, steps carved into the rock. The smell grew stronger, that sharp chemical scent mixing with salt and something else, something organic and decayed. Then the tunnel opened into a chamber. Marcus stepped into the space and stopped, his flashlight beam sweeping across the room. The chamber was maybe 20 feet across, carved out of solid rock, with a ceiling high enough that his light couldn't quite reach it. The walls were lined with wooden crates, stacked floor to ceiling, each one stamped with faded letters and numbers Marcus couldn't read in the dim light. But in the center of the room, illuminated by his flashlight, was something that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. A vault. Massive, industrial, the kind you'd find in a bank or a government building. 8 feet tall, 6 feet wide, steel reinforced and sealed with a combination lock that looked like it belonged in a museum. Gunnar moved toward it cautiously, circling, sniffing, his growl steady and constant now. Marcus approached slowly, his heart pounding in his ears. He ran his hand over the vault's surface. The steel was cold, bone cold, but dry, despite the moisture in the air. Someone had maintained this. Someone had cared for it, even in this hidden chamber beneath a sealed lighthouse. On the vault's door, engraved in the steel, were words, "Property of the United States Treasury, 1,962. Marcus stepped back, mind racing. 1,962. Edmund had sealed the lighthouse in 1968. 6 years after whatever was inside, this vault had been placed here. Gunnar barked sharply, pulling Marcus's attention away from the vault. The dog stood near one of the wooden crates, pawing at it, his agitation growing. Marcus moved to the crate and examined it. The wood was old, but solid, held together with rusted nails. Stenciled on the side in faded black paint were words that made Marcus's blood run cold. Contraband, property of U.S. Customs, Halifax, seizure, 1,961. He looked around the chamber again, really seeing it now. Every crate bore similar markings, different dates, different locations, but all marked as contraband, all marked as seized. This wasn't a storage room. It was a smuggler's vault, and Edmund Thorne had sealed it beneath his lighthouse for 56 years. Marcus pulled out his phone, checking for signal. Nothing. They were too deep, too far from civilization. He was alone down here with Gunnar, and a vault full of secrets that men had probably killed for. Gunnar barked again, more urgently this time, and Marcus turned to see the dog staring back toward the tunnel entrance, ears pricked forward, body rigid. Then Marcus heard it. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. Footsteps. Coming down the ladder. Someone else was in the lighthouse. And they were coming down. Marcus killed his phone's flashlight, plunging the chamber into absolute darkness. Gunnar pressed against his leg. Silent now, waiting. The footsteps grew louder, echoing down the tunnel, accompanied by the scrape of boots on stone and heavy breathing. Marcus's hand went to his belt, where he used to carry a sidearm. But he wasn't a soldier anymore. He was a homeless veteran with nothing but a dog and a lighthouse he'd inherited an hour ago. The footsteps stopped. A light appeared in the tunnel entrance, bright and harsh, sweeping across the chamber walls. A voice called out, deep and rough, with an accent Marcus couldn't place. "I know you're down here, Webb. Edmund told me you'd come eventually." Marcus didn't move. Gunnar's growl was so low, Marcus felt it, more than heard it. A vibration through the dog's body pressed against his leg. The light moved closer. "Your grandfather made Edmund a promise 50 years ago. A promise to keep this place sealed until the right man came to open it." The voice paused. "Edmund thought you were that man. But I think Edmund was wrong." Marcus's pulse hammered. His throat felt tight. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but there was nowhere to go. The tunnel had only one entrance, and this man blocked it. Gunnar shifted slightly, muscles coiled, ready to spring. The light found them. Marcus squinted against the glare, raising one hand to shield his eyes. Behind the light, he could just make out a figure, tall, broad-shouldered, holding the flashlight in one hand and something else in the other. A gun. "Step away from the vault," the man said, "and call off your dog, or this ends badly for both of you." Marcus's hand dropped to Gunnar's collar, holding him back even as every fiber of the dog's being strained forward, ready to attack, ready to protect. "Who are you?" Marcus asked, his voice steadier than he felt. The man laughed, short and bitter. "Someone who's been waiting a very long time for that door to open. Someone who knows exactly what's inside. And someone who's not leaving here without it." He stepped fully into the chamber, and Marcus finally saw his face. Late 50s, maybe early 60s, weathered and hard, with eyes that had seen violence and hadn't been bothered by it. He wore a dark coat and heavy boots, and he moved with the confidence of a man who'd done this before. "Edmund Thorne betrayed people when he sealed this lighthouse," the man continued. "Powerful people. People who don't forget and don't forgive. He thought he could hide what he'd done by leaving it to Thomas Webb's grandson. The man smiled, cold and empty. But Thomas Webb is dead, and his grandson is about to wish he'd stayed in that Walmart parking lot. Marcus's mind raced. Gunner trembled beneath his hand, desperate to act, held back only by Marcus's grip. "What's in the vault?" Marcus asked, buying time, trying to think. The man's smile widened. $285 million in gold and diamonds. Smuggled out of Cuba in 1961, seized by customs, and then stolen by Edmund Thorne and your grandfather before it could be returned. They hid it here, sealed this lighthouse, and disappeared. Edmund lived long enough to regret it. Your grandfather didn't. Marcus felt the words like a physical blow. His grandfather had been a thief. Edmund had been a thief. And now, Marcus stood in a chamber full of stolen contraband, while a man with a gun told him his family legacy was built on crime. "That's not my problem," Marcus said quietly. "I didn't steal anything. I didn't even know this place existed until today." "No," the man agreed. "But you inherited it, which makes it your problem now." He raised the gun slightly, pointing it directly at Marcus's chest. "Open the vault." Marcus didn't move. "I don't know the combination." "Then figure it out. Because if that vault isn't open in the next 5 minutes, I'm going to put a bullet in your dog, and then I'm going to put one in you. And then I'm going to take however long it takes to get that vault open myself." Gunner snarled, teeth bared, and Marcus's grip tightened on the dog's collar. If Gunner attacked, the man would shoot. If Marcus refused, the man would shoot. There was no good option. But then Marcus remembered the key. The brass key Edmund had sent him, with the lighthouse etched into its head and words engraved on the shaft. "Truth outlasts stone." He reached slowly into his pocket, watching the man's eyes track his movement. "I have something. Might be what you need." The man gestured with the gun. "Show me." Slowly, Marcus pulled out the key and held it up. The brass gleamed in the flashlight beam. The man's eyes widened slightly, just for a moment, before his expression hardened again. "Give it to me." Marcus shook his head. "No. I open the vault. Then we talk." The man's jaw tightened. "You're not in a position to negotiate." "Neither are you," Marcus said, surprised by his own calm. "You need that vault open. You could shoot me and search my body, but Gunner won't let you. And if you shoot Gunner first, you'll have to kill me before I can fight back. Either way, you waste time. And I'm guessing you don't want to be down here any longer than necessary." The man stared at him for a long moment. Then he lowered the gun slightly, just enough to make a point. "Fine, open it. But if you try anything, the dog dies first." Marcus nodded slowly. He moved toward the vault. Gunner pressed against his leg, never more than a step away. His hands shook as he examined the combination lock. But then he noticed something he'd missed before. Below the combination dial was a keyhole. Marcus looked at the engraving on the key shaft again. "Truth outlasts stone." He thought about his grandfather, about Edmund Thorne, about 56 years of secrets buried beneath a frozen lighthouse. He inserted the key into the lock and turned it. The mechanism clicked. The vault door trembled. And then, slowly, silently, it began to swing open. The man behind him exhaled, a sound somewhere between relief and hunger. Finally, but as the vault door opened fully, revealing the darkness inside, Gunner barked once, sharp and warning, and Marcus realized that Edmund Thorne hadn't just left him a lighthouse. He'd left him a choice. And that choice was about to change everything. The vault door swung wide, and Marcus's flashlight beam swept across the interior. The space was maybe 8 feet deep, lined with shelves that held wooden boxes and metal containers. But what dominated the center of the vault secured to the floor with heavy bolts, was a second, smaller safe, its door sealed with a combination lock and 3 deadbolts, and covering every inch of the vault's walls, plastered like wallpaper, were documents. Thousands of pages, yellowed with age, each one covered in handwriting, typewritten text, official stamps, and signatures. The man behind Marcus pushed forward, gun still raised but his attention now fixed on the vault's contents. His eyes widened as he scanned the documents, and Marcus saw something shift in his expression. Recognition, then shock, then rage. "No," the man whispered. "No, this isn't right. This isn't what was supposed to be here." Gunner pressed harder against Marcus's leg, his growl deepening. Marcus's eyes adjusted to the light reflecting off the vault's interior, and he began to read the documents closest to him. U.S. Customs Service, Halifax Field Office. Evidence of corruption, 1,961. Internal investigation. Seized assets, misappropriated. List of involved personnel. Special Agent Vincent Caro. Director Thomas Milhouse. Harbor Master David Chen. Marcus's breath caught. These weren't records of smuggled goods. These were records of who had stolen them. The man's voice cut through the silence, sharp and dangerous. "Where is it? Where's the gold?" Marcus turned slowly, careful to keep Gunner between himself and the gun. "I don't think there ever was any gold. I think Edmund and my grandfather stole something more valuable than money." The man's face twisted with fury. "Thorne promised my father, promised him, that the vault contained everything that was taken. 285 million in assets, ready to be recovered when the time was right." He gestured violently at the documents covering the walls. "This is worthless. This is just paper. Paper with names," Marcus said quietly. "Names of every corrupt official involved in the smuggling operation. Names of the men who were supposed to be stopping the smugglers, but were working with them instead." He looked at the documents again, reading dates and locations. "Edmund and my grandfather didn't steal the contraband. They stole the evidence of who was actually running the operation." The man's hand tightened on the gun. "My father was Vincent Caro. He spent 30 years looking for this vault, because Edmund Thorne and Thomas Webb threatened to expose him if he ever came after them. They held this over his head until he died. And you're telling me all he was afraid of was paperwork?" Marcus met his eyes. "Paperwork that would have sent him to prison. Paperwork that still can send people to prison, if these names are connected to people who are still alive, still in power." Caro's son. Marcus couldn't remember if he'd heard a first name. Laughed bitterly. "You think anyone cares about crimes from 60 years ago? The men on those walls are dead or retired. This evidence is worthless." But Gunner's body language told Marcus otherwise. The dog was focused not on Caro's son, but on the inner safe at the center of the vault. His nose twitched, his tail was rigid, and his growl had taken on a new quality, urgent and insistent. "What's in the smaller safe?" Marcus asked. Caro's son followed his gaze, then back to Marcus. "I don't know, and I don't care. This is over. My father wasted his life chasing a ghost, and now I've wasted mine." He raised the gun again. "You can keep your precious documents. I'm leaving. Number 5. Hearted 4417 Place." But he didn't move. Marcus saw the hesitation in his eyes, the same hunger that had driven his father for decades, the need to know what was worth protecting for 56 years. "You're not going to leave without opening that safe," Marcus said. Caro's son stared at him for a long moment. Then he lowered the gun slightly. "Fine, open it. But if it's empty, if this is all some elaborate joke Edmund played on all of us, I'm walking out of here and burning this lighthouse to the ground." Marcus moved deeper into the vault, Gunner at his side. The combination lock looked original, but above it was a small brass plate with an inscription. Thomas Webb, Keeper of Truth, 1953 to 1961. Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. His grandfather's name, engraved on a safe hidden inside a vault beneath a sealed lighthouse. This wasn't about smuggling or corruption or stolen goods. This was about something his grandfather had protected with his life. He examined the combination lock. 3 dials, each numbered 0 through 9. No obvious clues. No instructions. But then he remembered the photograph Edmund had sent him. The one of Thomas and Edmund standing on the rocks at Keeper's Point in October 1953. October 1953. 10:53. Marcus tried the combination. 1053. The lock clicked. He tried the first deadbolt, and it slid open smoothly, as though it had been oiled recently. The second and third deadbolts followed. Caro's son stepped closer, gun forgotten in his hand, his attention entirely on the safe. Marcus pulled the safe door open. Inside was a metal box, no bigger than a shoebox, wrapped in oilcloth and sealed with wax. Beside it was an envelope, newer than anything else in the vault, with Marcus's name written across it in Edmund Thorne's shaky handwriting. Marcus picked up the envelope first. His hands trembled as he opened it and unfolded the letter inside. Marcus, if you're reading this, you've made it further than I thought you would. What you've found in this vault is the reason Thomas and I disappeared from public life after 1961. We discovered that the smuggling operation we'd been investigating wasn't being run by criminals from outside the government. It was being run by the government itself, by men who used their positions to steal from the very operations they were supposed to be stopping. Thomas documented everything. Every transaction, every name, every piece of evidence we could gather. We planned to go public with it, to bring them all down. But the night before we were supposed to turn everything over to federal authorities, Thomas's car was forced off a cliff on the coast road. The official report called it an accident. We both knew better. I sealed the lighthouse the day after his funeral. I couldn't risk those men finding what Thomas had died protecting. And I couldn't risk your father, or you, becoming their next targets. The box inside this safe contains the original evidence, everything Thomas collected before he died. The documents on the vault walls are copies, insurance in case something happened to the originals. But Marcus, I need you to understand something. The men Thomas exposed weren't acting alone. They were part of a network that stretched from Halifax to Washington, D.C., from customs officials to congressmen to people whose names would shock you. Some of them are dead now, but some of them are still alive, still in power, still protected by the same system they corrupted 60 years ago. Opening this safe puts a target on your back. Using what's inside makes you an enemy of very powerful people. That's why I left the choice to you. Your grandfather died trying to expose the truth. I lived by burying it. Neither of us found peace. Maybe you can. Edmund Thorne. Marcus lowered the letter slowly. His throat felt tight. Gunner pressed against him, offering the only comfort he could. Caro's son's voice cut through the silence. What does it say? Marcus looked at him. It says your father wasn't just corrupt. He was part of something bigger. And the evidence inside this box can prove it. Caro's son's face went pale. That's impossible. My father told me he was investigating the smugglers, trying to stop them. Your father was lying, Marcus said quietly. And my grandfather died, because he found out. The gun in Caro's son's hand trembled. Marcus saw something break behind his eyes, the shattering of a lifetime of belief, of the story he'd been told about who his father was. Let me see the box, he said, his voice hollow. Marcus hesitated. Gunner growled, low and warning. Please, Caro's son added, and the word sounded like it cost him everything. Marcus picked up the metal box. It was heavier than he expected, solid and cold through the oilcloth. He unwrapped it slowly, revealing a simple steel container with a hinged lid and a small lock that opened when he pressed the latch. Inside were documents, photographs, audio recordings on old reel-to-reel tapes, and something that made Marcus's heart stop. A leather notebook, its pages filled with his grandfather's handwriting, documenting meetings, transactions, conversations, everything Thomas Webb had witnessed in the final months of his life. Caro's son stepped closer, staring at the contents with the expression of a man watching his entire world collapse. Marcus handed him one of the photographs. But, it showed Vincent Caro, younger but unmistakable, shaking hands with a man in an expensive suit. Behind them, clearly visible, was a cargo container marked with customs seals. The date stamp on the photo read, the 12th of August 1961. Caro's son stared at the photograph for a long moment. Then, his hand opened, and the gun clattered to the floor. "He told me he was a hero," he whispered. "He told me Edmund and Thomas were the criminals, that they'd stolen from the government, and he'd spent his life trying to recover what was taken." He looked up at Marcus, tears streaming down his face. He lied. About everything. Marcus didn't know what to say. He thought about his own father, about the stories families told themselves to make sense of the things that didn't make sense, about how truth could destroy as thoroughly as any bullet. Gunnar moved forward cautiously, approaching Caro's son. The dog's posture had softened, no longer aggressive, just watchful. He sniffed the man's hand, then sat down beside him, as though recognizing shared pain. "What do we do now?" Caro's son asked, his voice breaking. Marcus looked at the vault, at the documents covering the walls, at the metal box containing evidence of crimes committed 60 years ago by men who might still be alive, might still be powerful, might still be dangerous. Edmund had left him a choice. Marcus Webb, homeless veteran, former soldier, man with $23 and a German shepherd, stood in a smuggler's vault beneath a frozen lighthouse and made the only choice his grandfather would have wanted him to make. "We finish what my grandfather started," Marcus said. "We expose the truth." Caro's son looked up at him, eyes red but clearing. "Yes," Marcus said, "but it'll also clear my grandfather's name. And maybe, just maybe, it'll bring down the people who are still benefiting from what they did." Gunnar barked once, sharp and approving. Caro's son picked up the gun from where it had fallen, and for a moment Marcus tensed. But the man simply engaged the safety and set it carefully on one of the vault's shelves. Then he extended his hand. "My name is Daniel," he said. Marcus stared at the offered hand for a long moment. This was the son of the man who'd killed his grandfather, the man who'd just held him at gunpoint, the man who'd threatened to shoot Gunnar. But he was also a man who'd just had his entire life shattered by the truth, and who was choosing to stand on the right side of that truth despite the cost. Marcus reached out and shook Daniel's hand. Gunnar's tail wagged, once, twice, then settled into a steady rhythm. The two men stood in the vault for a long moment, neither sure exactly what happened next, but both knowing that they'd crossed a line they couldn't uncross. Above them, the storm raged against the frozen lighthouse. Below them, the ocean crashed against the cliffs. And in the vault between those two forces, Marcus Webb and Daniel Caro began the work of pulling 60 years of secrets into the light. But neither of them noticed the third figure who stood in the tunnel entrance, hidden in shadow. A figure who'd been waiting for this moment, who'd known exactly where to find them, and who had no intention of letting Marcus Webb or Daniel Caro leave Keeper's Point alive. The game wasn't over. It had only just begun. Marcus and Daniel worked through the night, carefully documenting everything in the vault. Marcus used his phone to photograph the pages covering the walls, while Daniel organized the contents of the metal box, creating an inventory of evidence that grew more damning with each item they cataloged. Gunnar paced the perimeter of the chamber, restless in a way that made Marcus's instincts scream. The dog kept returning to the tunnel entrance, staring into the darkness, ears forward, body tense. "Something's wrong," Marcus said, watching Gunnar's behavior. Daniel looked up from the ledger he'd been photographing. "What do you mean? What? What do you mean? Gunnar doesn't act like this unless there's a threat." Marcus moved to where the dog stood, crouching beside him. "What is it, boy?" Gunnar whined, low and urgent, then barked sharply toward the tunnel. Marcus killed his phone's flashlight. Daniel hesitated, then complied. The vault plunged into darkness, broken only by the faint glow of Daniel's phone timer and the distant illumination from the tunnel above. For several long seconds, there was only silence and the sound of Gunnar's breathing. Then Marcus heard it. Footsteps, careful and measured, descending the ladder from the lighthouse. "Someone else is here," Marcus whispered. Daniel's voice was tight with fear. "Who? No one knows about this place. Except us." "Edmund knew," Marcus said. "And if Edmund knew, maybe he told someone else." The footsteps reached the bottom of the ladder and paused. Then a woman's voice echoed down the tunnel, clear and authoritative. "Mr. Webb, I know you're down there. My name is Agent Sarah Chen, Federal Bureau of Investigation. I need you to come out slowly, with your hands visible." Webb lying by. "I'll enter." Marcus exchanged a glance with Daniel in the darkness. FBI. That either meant help had arrived, or Edmund's warning about powerful people was about to prove accurate. "How do we know you're really FBI?" Marcus called back. "You don't," the woman replied. "But I'm the one holding federal credentials and a warrant to search this property for evidence related to the Thomas Webb murder investigation of 1961. And I'm the one standing between you and the 3 armed men currently surrounding the lighthouse entrance." Marcus's blood ran cold. "What men?" "Private security contractors hired by the Caro Foundation to protect what they believe is rightfully theirs." Her voice moved closer, echoing off the stone walls. "I've been tracking the Foundation's activities for 2 years, ever since they began making inquiries about Edmund Thorne's property. When I heard he'd died and left the lighthouse to Thomas Webb's grandson, I knew someone would make a move tonight." Daniel spoke up, his voice shaking. "The Caro Foundation is my family's charity organization. I had no idea they were. Funding illegal activities to recover your father's buried secrets?" Chen finished. "No, Mr. Caro. I don't think you did. But the people running that foundation now certainly knew. And they have no intention of letting Marcus Webb walk away with the evidence your father spent his life trying to hide." Marcus's mind raced. 3 armed men above, an FBI agent in the tunnel, and the only exit blocked by both. Gunnar pressed against his leg, trembling with the effort of holding back his protective instincts. "What do you want from us?" Marcus asked. "The truth," Chen replied. "The same thing your grandfather wanted. I've spent 2 years building a case against the network Vincent Caro was part of, but I don't have the evidence to make it stick. Edmund Thorne contacted me 3 months before he died. He told me about this vault, about what was hidden inside, and about his plan to leave it to you." Her footsteps grew closer. "He thought you'd be strong enough to see this through. Was he right?" Marcus looked at Gunnar. The dog's eyes met his, steady and certain despite the danger. Then he looked at Daniel, who nodded slowly. "Yeah," Marcus said. "He was right." A flashlight beam cut through the darkness as Agent Chen stepped into the chamber. She was younger than Marcus expected, maybe early 40s, with sharp eyes that took in everything at once. The vault, the documents, the metal box. the two men standing protectively over evidence that could rewrite decades of history. "Good," she said, lowering her weapon slightly. "Because we don't have much time. The men outside will breach the lighthouse in approximately 10 minutes, and they're not coming to talk." "How do we get out?" Daniel asked. Chen smiled grimly. Edmund thought of that too. "There's a second tunnel on the far side of this chamber, hidden behind the vault. It leads to a cave system that exits near the base of the cliffs. Edmund used it to smuggle evidence out when things got too dangerous." Marcus moved deeper into the vault, searching the back wall. Sure enough, behind the smaller safe, barely visible unless you knew to look for it, was a narrow opening in the rock. "We'll never fit everything through there," Daniel said, staring at the thousands of documents covering the vault walls. "We don't need everything," Chen replied. "We need the metal box, your grandfather's notebook, and Marcus's testimony about what Edmund told him. The documents on these walls are copies. Important copies, but the originals are what matter for prosecution." A distant bang echoed through the tunnel above, the sound of the lighthouse door being forced open. "They're inside," Chen said urgently. "We need to move now." Marcus grabbed the metal box, while Daniel gathered his grandfather's notebook and the most critical documents they'd photographed. Chen swept her flashlight toward the hidden tunnel, illuminating a passage so narrow they'd have to move single file. "Gunner first," Marcus said. "He knows how to navigate tight spaces." The German shepherd didn't hesitate, pushing into the tunnel, with Marcus right behind him. Daniel followed, and Chen brought up the rear, pausing only to pull a small device from her pocket and place it near the vault's entrance. "Insurance," she explained, catching Marcus's questioning look. "If they try to follow us, they'll find the tunnel collapsed behind us." They moved through the passage in darkness, Chen's flashlight providing the only illumination. The walls pressed close, slick with moisture and ice. Marcus heard Gunner's claws scraping against stone ahead, the dogs breathing steady despite the confined space. Behind them, voices echoed through the main chamber. Angry voices, searching voices, getting closer. "There's a tunnel." Chen's hand found the detonator in her pocket. "Keep moving," she urged. "Don't stop. Don't look back." The passage began to climb, rising sharply through the rock. Marcus's lungs burned with the effort of pushing forward. Gunner struggled ahead, limping slightly from his injured leg, but refusing to slow down. Then the passage opened into a larger cave, and Marcus heard the sound he'd been hoping for. Waves crashing against rocks, the wind howling through openings in the stone, the cold, clean smell of ocean air. They burst out onto a narrow ledge, maybe 20 feet above the water. The storm had intensified, snow falling so thick Marcus could barely see the ocean below. But there, tied to a metal ring driven into the rock, was a small motorboat, covered in snow but intact. "Edmund's escape plan," Chen said, already moving toward the boat. Behind them, an explosion shook the cliff face. Not loud, more of a deep thump, but enough to send cracks spiderwebbing through the rock around the tunnel entrance. Chen had collapsed the passage. "Get in the boat," she ordered, already unhooking the mooring line. Marcus lifted Gunner into the boat first, then climbed in himself, the metal box clutched against his chest. Daniel followed, his face pale with shock and exhaustion. Chen jumped in last, already working the motor, coaxing it to life with hands that moved with practiced efficiency. The engine sputtered, coughed, then caught. Chen gunned it, pulling away from the cliff, just as rocks began to fall from above, tumbling into the water where they'd been moments before. They shot forward into the storm, waves crashing over the bow, snow stinging their faces. Marcus held Gunner close, protecting the dog's injured leg as the boat bounced violently across the water. Daniel clutched the side, looking like he might be sick. Chen navigated by instinct more than sight, steering them away from the cliffs and out into open water. Marcus looked back once and saw the lighthouse, standing dark and broken against the storm, and shadows moving along its base, searching for the boat they'd never catch. "Where are we going?" Marcus shouted over the wind. "Port Augustine," Chen called back. "Federal marshals are waiting there. We'll get you both into protective custody until we can process the evidence and make arrests." "How long will that take?" Chen met his eyes. "As long as it takes to bring down everyone involved. Could be weeks. Could be months." Goning. Marcus thought about his truck, abandoned in the clearing near the lighthouse. He thought about the $23 in his wallet, about the life he'd been living in parking lots and cheap motels, about how close he'd come to just giving up completely. Then he looked at Gunnar, still pressed against him, still loyal, still trusting despite everything they'd been through. And he looked at the metal box containing evidence of his grandfather's murder and the corruption that had cost Thomas Webb his life. "I'm not going anywhere," Marcus said. "Not until we finish this." Chen smiled, fierce and approving. "Good. Because what you've got in that box is going to change everything." The boat cut through the storm, carrying them toward Port Augustine and whatever came next. Behind them, Keeper's Point Lighthouse stood alone in the darkness, its secrets finally exposed, its long silence finally broken. And in the vault beneath the frozen stone, the documents that had been hidden for 60 years began to tell their story to anyone brave enough to listen. 3 weeks later, Marcus Webb stood in a federal courthouse, his hand on the metal box that had changed his life. Agent Chen sat beside him, organized and confident. Daniel Caro sat on his other side, having turned himself into a cooperating witness who'd provided testimony about his father's activities and the foundation that had tried to bury the truth. Gunnar lay at Marcus's feet, wearing a vest that identified him as an official service dog. The German Shepherd had been declared a key asset in the investigation, his instincts credited with preventing the destruction of critical evidence. The prosecutor stood before the judge, laying out a case that stretched back 60 years and reached into the highest levels of government and law enforcement. Names were named. Evidence was presented. Careers ended in a single afternoon. When it was Marcus's turn to testify, he spoke clearly and simply about what he'd found in the lighthouse, about his grandfather's murder, about Edmund Thorne's lifetime of protecting secrets he couldn't expose without risking everything. The judge listened carefully, occasionally glancing at Gunnar, who remained perfectly still throughout the proceedings. When the testimony ended, the judge called a recess. Marcus stepped outside the courthouse with Chen and Daniel, breathing in cold winter air that tasted like freedom. "What happens now?" Daniel asked. Chen pulled out her phone, scanning messages. "Now we wait for the indictments to come down. But Marcus, you should know that the evidence you provided has already resulted in the resignation of 3 federal officials, the closure of 2 ongoing investigations into corruption, and the reopening of at least 7 cold cases, including your grandfather's murder." Marcus felt something loosen in his chest, something that had been tight since the moment he'd read Edmund's letter in the Walmart parking lot. "Will they reopen the investigation into my grandfather's death?" he asked. Chen nodded. "Already done. New evidence suggests his car was forced off the road deliberately. We've identified 3 suspects, all connected to Vincent Caro. If we can prove their involvement, your grandfather's name will be cleared officially, and you'll be entitled to death benefits and military honors that should have been granted 60 years ago." Marcus closed his eyes. Gunnar pressed against his leg, grounding him. Daniel cleared his throat. "Marcus, I know I can never make up for what my father did, but the Caro Foundation has assets, legitimate assets, that I'm in the process of liquidating. I'd like to establish a fund in your grandfather's name, something to help veterans who've fallen through the cracks the way you almost did." Marcus opened his eyes and looked at Daniel. The man who'd held him at gunpoint in a vault beneath the ocean. The man who'd chosen truth over family loyalty. The man who'd become an unlikely ally in the fight to expose corruption that had lasted generations. I'd like that, Marcus said quietly. But I want Gunner's name on it too. The Webb Gunner Foundation for Veterans. Thank you for watching. The CUN Putty 73. There's not 4373. There's a memberses amenders 73. There's a memberses amender 73. There's now foreman. There's next on Sivanevran. There's now foreman. There's next on Sivanevran. Daniel smiled. The first genuine smile Marcus had seen from him. Perfect. Agent Chen's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her expression changed. Became something Marcus couldn't quite read. What is it? He asked. The Lighthouse, Chen said slowly. A structural engineer inspected it this morning. The explosion we set off weakened the foundation. The whole structure is at risk of collapsing into the ocean. Marcus felt a strange pang of loss. Can it be saved? Chen shook her head. Not without millions in restoration work. The Historical Society is meeting next week to decide whether to try or just let nature take its course. Marcus thought about Edmund Thorne, about his grandfather, about the secrets that had been buried in that lighthouse for so long. Then he thought about the truth that had finally been exposed, the justice that was finally being served. Let it fall, he said. Its job is done. Chen nodded slowly. I think Edmund would agree with you. They stood in silence for a moment. Three people who'd been strangers weeks ago, now bound together by the weight of history and the burden of truth. Then Gunner barked, sharp and insistent, and Marcus looked down to see the dog staring at something across the street. A figure stood in the shadows, watching them, not threatening, but present. Marcus tensed, but Chen placed a gentle hand on his arm. It's all right. That's Edmund's daughter. She wanted to meet you, to thank you for finishing what her father started. The woman crossed the street, maybe 60 years old, with her father's sharp eyes and her own quiet strength. She stopped in front of Marcus and extended her hand. Mr. Webb, she said. I'm Catherine Thorne. My father spent his entire life carrying the weight of what happened to your grandfather. In his final months, he talked about you constantly, hoped you'd be the one to finally bring the truth to light. She smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. Thank you. For my father, and for yours. Marcus shook her hand, feeling the connection across generations, the completion of something that had begun long before he was born. Your father saved my life, Marcus said. He gave me a purpose when I didn't have one. I'm the one who should be thanking him. Number. Catherine reached into her coat and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. He wanted you to have this. His attorney was instructed to give it to you once the trial was over. Marcus unwrapped the package carefully. Inside was a photograph, old and faded but well preserved. It showed his grandfather standing beside Edmund Thorne on the rocks at Keeper's Point. Both men young and strong and smiling, with the lighthouse rising behind them against a clear sky. On the back, in Edmund's handwriting, were words Marcus would carry with him for the rest of his life. To Marcus, your grandfather died protecting the truth. I lived hiding it. You've done what neither of us could. You've set it free. The lighthouse is gone, but the light remains. Carry it forward. Edmund Thorne, 2024. Marcus stared at the photograph for a long moment, then carefully tucked it into his jacket pocket, right next to the brass key that had started everything. Gunner pressed against his leg one more time, and Marcus knelt down, wrapping his arms around the dog who'd saved his life in more ways than he could count. We did it, boy, Marcus whispered. We actually did it. Gunner's tail wagged steadily, and for the first time in years, Marcus Webb felt something he'd almost forgotten existed. Peace. Number 4. Reader performance. Number 4. The courthouse doors opened behind them. The trial was resuming. Justice was waiting. Marcus Webb, Former soldier, homeless veteran, grandson of a murdered hero, stood up slowly. He looked at Agent Chen, at Daniel Caro, at Catherine Thorne, at all the people whose lives had been changed by one frozen lighthouse and the secrets it had held. Then he looked down at Gunnar, who gazed back with absolute trust and unwavering loyalty. "Let's finish this," Marcus said. And together, man and dog walked back into the courthouse to complete the mission that had begun 60 years ago on a rocky shore, when two men made a choice to protect truth over treasure, justice over silence, and hope over fear. The lighthouse was gone. The vault was empty. The secrets were exposed. But the light remained, and it would burn for as long as men like Marcus Webb and dogs like Gunnar stood together against the darkness. 6 months later, on a warm June morning, Marcus Webb stood on a newly constructed pier overlooking the spot where Keeper's Point Lighthouse once stood. The structure had collapsed into the ocean 3 months earlier, on a stormy night that felt almost ceremonial, as though the building itself had decided its time was done. But where the lighthouse once stood, something new was rising. The Webb Gunner Foundation had purchased the property, and construction crews were finishing work on a retreat center for veterans and their service dogs. The building was simple, practical, built from local stone and timber, designed to last generations. A bronze plaque near the entrance bore 2 names, Thomas Webb and Edmund Thorne. Marcus watched as workers installed the final windows, Gunnar sitting contentedly at his side. The dog's leg had healed completely, and he moved with the same confidence and grace he'd shown in Afghanistan, though with a little more gray around his muzzle. Agent Sarah Chen approached from the parking area, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She'd become a regular visitor to the construction site, checking on progress and, Marcus suspected, making sure he was doing all right. "Looks good," she said, handing him one of the cups. "You think it'll be ready for the dedication ceremony next month?" Marcus nodded. The contractor promised. "And I want Catherine Thorne to be the one who cuts the ribbon. She'll like that." Chen took a sip of her coffee, then gestured toward the ocean. It was pushed off the road, exactly like we suspected. 3 separate witnesses have come forward now that they know they won't be prosecuted for remaining silent. Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest, but also something else. Closure. Will they reopen the criminal case? Already done. 2 of the 3 suspects are still alive. We expect indictments within the week. Chen looked at him carefully. "Are you ready for that?" Chen longed. Chen, for the trial, the media attention. All of it? Marcus thought about the past 6 months. The depositions, the interviews, the constant scrutiny. He thought about the nightmares that had finally started to fade. The PTSD that Gunnar's presence and purpose had helped him manage. He thought about the money from Edmund's estate and the Caro Foundation that had allowed him to move out of his truck and into a small house near the construction site. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I'm ready." "No," Daniel Caro's voice called out from behind them. Marcus turned to see Daniel walking toward them, dressed in work clothes, face-tanned from spending his days on the construction site. The transformation in the man had been remarkable. He'd dismantled his father's corrupt foundation, cooperated fully with federal investigators, and become one of the project's most dedicated volunteers. The 3 of them walked into the nearly completed building. The main hall was spacious and bright, with large windows overlooking the ocean. But the room Daniel led them to was different. Smaller, quieter, with walls lined in dark wood and soft lighting that gave it the feeling of a chapel. In the center of the room stood a glass case containing the metal box Marcus had recovered from the vault. The documents inside had been preserved and digitized, available now for historians and investigators and anyone who wanted to understand what had happened 60 years ago. But the originals remained here, in this room, as a testament to the price of truth. On the walls hung photographs. Thomas Webb, in his Coast Guard uniform. Edmund Thorne, standing beside the lighthouse. Marcus's grandmother, whom he'd never met, holding a baby. Marcus's father, in her arms. And one new photograph, taken by Agent Chen during the trial. Marcus and Gunnar standing on the courthouse steps, the metal box between them, both looking tired but determined. The architect suggested we call it the Truth Keeps Room, Daniel said. As in, truth keeps faith, truth keeps promises, truth keeps light. What do you think? Marcus felt Gunnar press against his leg. The dog's presence, as always, grounding him, reminding him that he wasn't alone. I think my grandfather would approve, Marcus said softly. Catherine Thorne entered the room, moving slowly, but with purpose. She carried a small wooden box, which she set gently on a table near the glass case. I wanted you to have this before the dedication, she said to Marcus. My father left it with his attorney, with instructions to give it to you once the retreat center was finished. Marcus opened the box carefully. Inside was Edmund's lighthouse keeper's logbook, its pages filled with neat entries documenting weather conditions, ship sightings, and maintenance records from the 1,950 seconds and early 1,960 seconds. But tucked into the back was something else. A letter, sealed in an envelope with Marcus's name. He opened it with trembling fingers. Marcus, if you're reading this, the retreat center is built, and you've given veterans like yourself a place to heal. I can't tell you how much that means, how much it would have meant to your grandfather. Thomas used to say that the lighthouse's job wasn't just to warn ships of danger, it was to show them the way home. That's what you're doing now. Showing people the way home when they've lost their direction. There's one more thing I need to tell you. One more secret I kept even from Catherine. The gold and diamonds everyone believed were in that vault, they were never there. Your grandfather and I recovered them, yes, but we didn't hide them. We returned them to their rightful owners, to the Cuban families they'd been stolen from in the first place. It took us years to track down the families, to make sure the money reached the right people. We did it quietly, secretly, because we knew if Vincent Caro and his associates learned what we'd done, they'd never stop hunting us. The vault was always a decoy. The real treasure was the evidence of corruption we left behind. And the real legacy is what you're building now. Your grandfather would be so proud of you, Marcus. I know I am. Keep the light burning. Edmund Thorne. Marcus read the letter twice, then handed it to Agent Chen, who read it and passed it to Daniel and Catherine. They stood in silence, processing the final revelation. They gave it all back, Daniel whispered. Everything my father spent his life searching for. Thomas and Edmund had already returned to the families it was stolen from. That's why Vincent Caro was so obsessed, Chen said. He must have suspected, but he could never prove it. The vault became his obsession, because he couldn't accept that they'd done the right thing. Marcus walked to the window and looked out at the ocean. Somewhere beneath those waves, the lighthouse lay in ruins. But here, on solid ground, something new had been built, something that would last. Gunnar joined him at the window, standing tall and alert, watching the horizon as though waiting for the next mission, the next purpose, the next person who needed saving. Marcus rested his hand on the dog's head. Gunnar's tail wagged steadily, and Marcus smiled. 1 month later, on a clear July morning, over 300 people gathered for the dedication of the Webb Gunner Veterans Retreat Center. Veterans from across the country attended, many with their service dogs, some in wheelchairs, some using canes, all carrying the visible and invisible wounds of service. Catherine Thorne stood at the podium, her voice strong and clear as she told the story of her father and Thomas Webb, of the lighthouse that had stood for over a century, and of the secrets that had finally been brought to light. Agent Sarah Chen presented Marcus with an official commendation from the Department of Justice for his role in exposing government corruption and helping to bring justice for crimes spanning 6 decades. Daniel Caro announced the establishment of a permanent endowment to ensure the retreat center would operate in perpetuity, funded by the liquidation of his father's assets and his own personal fortune. But the moment that brought tears to Marcus's eyes came when a representative from the U. Coast Guard stepped forward and presented him with his grandfather's posthumous Medal of Valor, finally awarded after 60 years, recognizing Thomas Webb's courage in exposing corruption despite the personal cost. Marcus accepted the medal with shaking hands, clutching it tight, feeling the weight of history and legacy and completed missions. Then it was his turn to speak. He walked to the podium, gunner at his side, and looked out at the crowd. Veterans who understood what it meant to serve, to sacrifice, to carry invisible wounds. Dogs who understood loyalty beyond words. People who'd come because they believed in second chances and new beginnings. 6 months ago, Marcus began, his voice stronger than he expected. I was sleeping in my truck in a Walmart parking lot. I had $23. A German Shepherd. The only thing I knew for certain was that this dog had saved my life more times than I could count, and I owed him the same loyalty he'd given me. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Then I inherited a frozen lighthouse from a man I'd never met, who knew my grandfather, who left me a choice: walk away from the past, or face it head on and expose the truth, no matter the cost. Marcus looked at Catherine, at Daniel, at Agent Chen. I didn't make that choice alone. None of us did. Edmund Thorne made it when he sealed the vault. My grandfather made it when he documented corruption, knowing it might cost him his life. Agent Chen made it when she chose to believe a homeless veteran with a wild story about a lighthouse. Daniel Caro made it when he chose truth over his father's legacy. He looked out at the crowd again. And now all of you are making it by being here, by believing that we can heal from what broke us, that we can find purpose after we thought purpose was gone, that we can be lights for each other when the darkness feels too heavy to bear. Gunner barked once, sharp and proud, and laughter rippled through the crowd. This retreat center exists because of secrets kept and secrets exposed, because of corruption confronted and justice served, because of a dog who refused to let me quit, and because of a grandfather I never knew who died protecting the truth. Marcus's voice broke slightly. It exists because sometimes the hardest missions are the ones that happen after we come home. He stepped back from the podium as applause filled the air. Catherine Thorne approached with scissors in hand, ready to cut the ribbons stretched across the center's entrance. But before she did, she pulled Marcus aside, her voice low enough that only he and Gunner could hear. My father wanted me to tell you one more thing. He said that on the night Thomas died, they'd made plans to expose everything the next morning. Thomas told him, if something happens to me, keep the light burning. That's what my father did for 60 years. And now, you're doing it too. Marcus felt tears slip down his cheeks. He didn't try to hide them. Catherine smiled, squeezed his hand, then returned to the ribbon. She raised the scissors, looked out at the crowd, and spoke clearly. Thomas Webb kept his light burning. Edmund Thorne kept his light burning. Marcus Webb and Gunner kept their light burning. Now let's make sure this light never goes out. She cut the ribbon. The crowd erupted in cheers. Veterans and dogs poured into the retreat center, exploring rooms designed specifically for their needs. Healing spaces built with understanding and care. A home for those who'd given everything and were finally receiving something in return. Marcus stood at the entrance with Gunner, watching people discover the center, watching faces light up with hope, watching service dogs settle contentedly beside their partners, watching healing begin in real time. Agent Chen appeared at his elbow. You did good, Marcus. We did good, he corrected. All of us. Daniel joined them, looking out at the crowd with an expression Marcus had come to recognize. The peace that comes from making amends, from choosing right over easy, from building instead of hiding. I'm thinking of going back to school, Daniel said quietly. Social work, maybe, or counseling for veterans. Something useful. Marcus nodded. You'd be good at that. Think there's room for one more volunteer at this place? Daniel asked. Marcus looked at Gunnar, who looked back with what could only be described as approval. Always room for people who want to help. The sun climbed higher in the sky, warming the rocks where the lighthouse once stood. Below the surface, the ruins lay silent, their secrets finally told, their burden finally lifted. But above ground, on solid earth, the Webb Gunner Veterans Retreat Center stood bright and strong, its doors open wide, its purpose clear, its light burning steady. And in that light, Marcus Webb stood with his dog, his friends, and his grandfather's legacy, knowing that they'd completed a mission 60 years in the making. The lighthouse was gone. The vault was empty. The truth was exposed. But the light remained, and it would burn for generations, guiding lost souls home, just as lighthouses had always done. Marcus Webb had inherited a frozen lighthouse for $1. He'd found a $285 million smuggler's vault. He'd exposed corruption, spanning 6 decades. He'd cleared his grandfather's name and brought justice for crimes long buried. But the real treasure he'd discovered wasn't gold or diamonds or money. It was purpose. It was healing. It was the chance to be a light for others, the way Gunnar had been a light for him. And as the sun set over Keeper's Point on that July evening, Marcus stood at the window of the Truth Keep's room. Because the mission wasn't over. It would never be over, as long as veterans needed healing, as long as truth needed protecting, as long as light needed keeping. And Marcus Webb, with his loyal German shepherd and his grandfather's legacy, would be there to keep that light burning bright. Always.